Hey everybody, I'm Jason,
And I'm Chris.
and welcome to CSN 15. Today we are talking about whether or not EBRs, or executive business reviews, are still a good tactic to have in your CS program. And Chris, I'd love for you to start off the conversation, and I'm going to pose a very simple question to you. Are they a good tactic anymore? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are they really are good tactic. They're an incredible way to capture and maintain alignment on the strategic priorities of the customer you're working with. But I think they get a bad rap in the market because a lot of organizations have the fallacy of trying to templatize them way too much. A CSM is a senior position. We need to be able to cater that presentation, especially when we're bringing customer executives onto, to what is relevant to that customer and to not overburden that executive with a ton of context that doesn't matter. So I think when it's done right, when the CSM has the autonomy to actually put together content that matters for that conversation, put together content that is, built around what they want to get out of that conversation and what they want to give to that customer that conversation, I think they're extremely powerful and they give a really good standpoint for that to be productive on both sides. But I think when you just do it to do it, or it's like this fixed milestone in a customer journey, it can sometimes come off as a time waste.
I think you hit my favorite point about this right there at the end. Like, doing it to do it is never a good thing, right? I think back to some of the organizations I've been involved in. They at some point I remember one very vividly. They were like, hey, we want you doing it every single quarter with your customers. And at that point, my book of business was like 35 customers. That is just not feasible from a time perspective on my side, as well as from a customer investment perspective. So I think doing it just to do it is not great. I think they very much are important. And a lot of what I've seen, experts and other people talk about is like, oh, are they bad? Are they good? Do we spend too much time and et cetera, et cetera? It's like, yeah, there is a lot of bad, but it all comes down to the individual person, how they do it. So from my perspective, they are super beneficial. You need to be smart about your cadencing and the timing of it. So you noted milestones, maybe coming out of onboarding in the first 6 months. That oftentimes might be something people think about doing, or a time when people think about doing it. But how much is there actually to show at 6 months? You sign a contract, your first 2 to 3 months are spent actually getting up and running with any platform. And then you have 3 months worth of data to show. Like, there's not a whole lot that can be told from that. So I know for myself, I tend to think about yearly is really my main goal. And I look at fiscal years. If I know a customer ends their fiscal year in December, January, I am spent all on trying to get data together, trying to tell that story and construct it with my customers. If it's a February fiscal, same thing in February, right? So timing for me is very much important. And I think that lands a lot better with customers. Hey, we're going to do this at very strategic times. When your fiscal year is ending, when you're talking about your planning and decision-making for the next year, we're going to introduce, here's the data to back up what our recommendations would be with your with our platform, I think if you can time it around that, it makes it way more effective and it keeps people more engaged.
Exactly. I think it's a really good target to try to do one annually because businesses change so much. But I also think making sure that you use it as a tactic and use it, as you mentioned, strategically. Like, when is there a good time for an EBR? You should target to do one annually, but maybe there is a good point and like the organization went through a major shift and we need that realignment session, or the executives are reevaluating the business's position and they want our insight. I think those are really good pieces, but I think doing it to do it or doing it because of a certain cadence, it's just going to devalue the conversation. I especially think back to, I had the same instance where we were kind of held to like quarterly business reviews. And I think what you start to get into is there are quarters where you're wasting the executive's time. Like, there's not enough here. There's not enough meat to it. The recommendations aren't changing. You're just bringing them back onto a call. And I feel like that's where the bad rap and the negativity comes from, is executives are very mindful of their time. They leave each meeting, and I'm honestly convinced, do that evaluation of like, was that a waste of my time? Was it not? So I think when we start to see executives not join EBRs, it's not because an EBR isn't a valuable meeting. It's because we're overdoing the use of this valuable meeting.
%. And I think even more to that, like, if what you're telling me doesn't keep my attention for the first 5 minutes, like the likelihood that they continue to listen for the remainder of the call, probably not high. And I think even more from a cadence perspective, when you do it is important, but also how long is the presentation? I'm a super big advocate for simplicity in almost everything I do. And when it comes to business reviews, even more so. I know that customers tend to typically care about very few things. They care about pipeline, they care about revenue, they care about impact to the business, and maybe some really want to know the roadmap. I can tell that story in 10 to 12 slides. I don't need a 50 slide deck to tell that business review story and thereby keep an executive on that call for that much longer. So simplicity is so important in that, to making sure execs feel like this is worth their time and we didn't take too much of it. So I think you and I both are very much in the camp of these are super important for any business and any CSM to be doing. I think it's just that mindfulness of what are we telling them, when are we telling them, and how long are we taking to tell them that story is what is most important. So now, question on that, as we talked about timing and length, what do you do to prepare for EBRs when you have them coming up? Is there something specific that you really hone in on? Is there a certain process that you really worked on over time that's done well? I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. The preparation for the EBR is the most essential point, and I think what actually makes it successful or not. Before I start to build any deck or do anything, trying to just break it into 3 sections so I know my priorities. What do I want out of the conversation? What do I want them to get out of the conversation? So like, what do I need that executive to know? Like, did we hit a key milestone? Was there a really big success that we had? Like, did we generate this level of pipeline? And I want to make sure I emphasize that. And then lastly, what are the actual next action items I want them to agree to? So then when I have those priorities, I can build my content around it and make those autonomous decisions of what slides do I include? What results do I include? What do I move to the appendix so that I can save time in this conversation and cater it correctly? I also think just doing your homework is really important. For those that work in the enterprise or strategic segment and you have customers who have IPO'd, read their quarterly earnings report, read their news center, read anything that they're putting out there, research the executives, try to figure out every single thing publicly about this organization that you can find so that you also have a perspective on their strategy, and back channeling that with your champion so that you're going into this conversation and the executive almost feels like you're part of their business. I think that's a really big piece of EBRs is like, if you're going in and asking them stupid questions, they're going to recognize that and they're going to devalue you. And I also think they're going to refer you to the level that you sound like you're speaking at. So if you're not speaking to them at an executive strategy level and you didn't do your prep homework to get there, I think that's what makes it where they're going to be less engaged. And then the last piece I find really beneficial is come with questions you want to ask them. What does your prep process look like usually?
Yeah, I think you hit on something that a lot of people forget to do. And I guess it depends on the type of businesses you work with. But being able to go and see a quarterly report, see what the earnings were, see if their CEO talks about any high-level strategy changes or initiatives is really important. And if you can come to the meeting with that context, it goes a long, long way to making sure that they feel like, exactly you said, you're doing your homework. I'll also touch on too, asking a dumb question. It's so easy to frame it in a way that makes it not a dumb question. And a phrase that I love to use whenever I'm trying to find those priorities, and maybe I should have already known them, or I'm trying to really get somebody to open up to me, is like, hey, I have some prior context, but I really want to make sure I'm up to date on what is going on for your organization, right? Like framing is like, oh, I already know a little bit. I'm not going to tell you what I already know, but I'm going to allude to that I know something. What do you know now? Tends to go pretty well. Like I use that same framing anytime I get introduced to a new customer that I'm taking over, and it just lands well, right? It makes them feel like that you are double checking what you already know to be true. And if you do have some facts that you can share, it goes a long way. But for me, prep-wise, it is data validation is so important for me. I am pulling as much data as I possibly can, compiling it into a single digestible format, as I noted before, right? I know typically what customers care about from a metric perspective. Going in and saying, hey, here's everything I have. Here's where we got that data and how we got that data. I'm now going to give it to you. You reverse engineer in your reporting, right? Most customers are going to do some sort of their own reports, whether that's in their CRM, MAP, however they do it. So if I can show them how I got my numbers and then they can try and recreate it, it usually goes a long way for us to make sure that we're doing due diligence and we are getting to the right number. There was one business review, I'll never forget this. I walk in feeling all confident. I hadn't done any prep with my customer and I'm like, hey, here's what I see from pipeline and close one. Looks great. And the guy goes, no, not even close to what we're reporting internally. I got caught out on that one hard. So ever since then, validate. That is a part of my process. It's a big thing that I emphasize and just really goes a long way to making sure that you and your customer are both confident in what you're reporting. And it also lets them have a bit more of a say, right? They have a seat at the table. They can come and say, hey, we actually have this data. Here's how we present it. Here's how we find it. Here's how we can work into the presentation. So being very hands-on with them goes an extremely long way to giving a coherent presentation that lands for everybody involved. And so overall, just make sure you're communicating with your customer. Make sure you keep them close. That truthfully goes a long way to keeping business reviews to being succinct and beneficial.
Yeah.
Last question, Chris. Fire away.
You hit on 2 points that I really want to emphasize. First, the data validation piece. I also think it's so valuable if you can get them to show you what their executives are measuring, whether that's like in Looker or Tableau, wherever they're going, and seeing what numbers are projected there and seeing if they match. So that at least if those aren't matching eye to eye, maybe your platform sits in the background, then having it where, your champion is confident in what's being presented so that they can stand up. And if that executive says, hey, this is what I'm seeing, they can kind of explain that logic. I think it's so beneficial if a person at the customer org is the one defending the data rather than you. And secondly, I just want to timestamp. That was like a pro tip for how to ask a dumb question without sounding dumb, of like, call out the homework you've done. If you can't answer a question for yourself and it's like, it sits in that maybe more basic region, I think it's so helpful to say to an executive like, hey, I've read some of your recent, news releases. I read your quarterly earnings report, but something that I wanted to make sure that I understood and aligned with you is XYZ. And then you get to ask that question, at least in their ears, they're like, they did their homework.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally phrasing and how you introduce things is so important, and it can make the difference of whether or not somebody starts to trust you or is just like, hey, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Like, let's not really bother with him, right? But we're getting close to the end here. And Chris, I would love for you to give me your hot take as it pertains to EBRs. What do you feel is controversial, your thoughts or what you see now in the market? Let's hear it.
Fine. I have two kind of related hot takes of if an EBR is more than 15 key slides that you're looking to show, it's no longer a conversation. I don't think we said this early enough, but EBR should 100% be a conversation. If there's more than 15 slides you're planning to present, it is a lecture and they are going to tune out. Like, I personally think the best.
You don't want to be an educator, Chris. You don't want to, go to school and have an auditorium full of people listening to you.
No, I did not get into this to be an educator for executives. But also, I think like you're asking for an exec's time and they're going to multitask. They probably have a ton of people on Slack or whatever IM they use that are messaging them questions. And I think the most valuable part is if you keep it a conversation. And I also feel like it keeps them locked in if you ask them questions directly, because there's nothing scarier on a meeting than being asked a question you weren't listening for the last 10 minutes. So I think if you kind of gear it towards this engaged thing and out of the gate, show them it's interactive, their ears perk up. They're so much more involved and actually listening. And then secondly, an EBR should never be more than an hour. It is not the movie Wicked. It does not need to be long. I've seen some nightmares where people are posting that like they do an hour and 30-minute EBR.
That's wild.
It is unnecessary.
That is so unnecessary. And it falls in line with one of my hot takes. So hot take number one for me, should not be longer than 30 minutes, honestly. There's not a need to do a whole roadmap and this and that. It's get to the data that the executive cares about, that your POC cares about, and keep it succinct. If you can do that, it's going to land so much more frequently, and it's going to make them want to actually engage with you more rather than, as we've talked about a few times, wasting their time on erroneous slides and things that don't matter. So that's hot take number one. 30 minutes or less is how long it should take you to do an effective EBR. Hot take number two is just do them, right? As we talked about, there are some organizations where maybe they want you to do them quarterly. There's some where you maybe have a little bit more free reign to dictate your own time and you can kind of choose when you do it, but just simply do them. Whether it's once a year, twice a year, or if you really want to be bold and do 4 times a year and hopefully the customer loves whatever you're talking to them about, but just do them. It goes such a long way to creating an opportunity for you and your champions to step back, say, hey, what are we doing that's working well? What are we doing that's not working well? And how do we course correct? So just get it out and start doing it. So Chris, to wrap up, give me your top 3 EBR tips as succinctly as possible.
Top EBR tip, keep it interactive and keep it focused on having a discussion rather than a lecture. Number 2, do your prep work. Go in and figure out what your focuses are, because also EBRs are discussions. Discussions go randomly. So if you at least have centered around your focuses, when that EBR starts to go astray from the perfect agenda that absolutely no meeting actually follows, you at least know in kind of rank order, where you need to take that conversation with the time you have remaining. And then third one, I would say, make sure you're engaging one-on-one with the executive. I love to send a prep or pre-read note to the executive before the EBR so that it kind of stands out. They're probably being asked to join a lot of EBRs. I think it shows that you're at least prepared and actually wanting to earn their time if you take the time to send them a one-on-one note that just says, hey, we have this coming up. Wanted to prep you with a few keynotes. Looking forward to your attendance. Let me know if anything's changed on your schedule. And just basically asking them for that confirmation there. I think that's the biggest thing that goes far. And then in your follow-up, doing the same. Sending an individual note to them with like key items you want them to call out, because they're not going to read the long recap you sent to the full group.
Okay. I love that. I love the one-to-one outreach and engagement with execs. I feel like a lot of people tend to just send the meeting invite and that's it, right? And you might rely on your POCs or your champions to be the ones to fill them in on what's to come. So I think that's a really nice touch and it goes a long way to relationship building. I'll give my top 3 and then we'll close out here. So number 1, going to beat this like a dead horse. Be concise, be succinct. It does not need to be long. It just needs to be good and it needs to be something that the team will find valuable. And that leads into number 2 for me, which is simply know the data inside and out. If you are going to them and reporting on pipeline, on revenue, sales usage, on whatever it is, you need to make sure that you can answer any question about how that data is calculated. Why are we seeing trends up or down? Where is it coming from? If you know the data inside and out, there's no question that somebody on a business review can ask you that will surprise you. And then the third thing simply is take the time to work with your champions on it. Don't rush it. It does not need to be done in a week. If it takes 2 weeks, if it takes 3, if it takes a month to get a business review across the finish line to the point where everybody's confident in it, take that time. It does not need to be rushed. Obviously, right, as we talked about, there's certain moments that happen within an organization where maybe we need to do it ad hoc or at that or on the spot, but still take the time to get the data together. And I don't think anybody would fault you for saying, hey, we're going slow because we want to make sure we do this right and we want to make sure it's accurate for you. So, but all in all,
I do have one follow-up to your hot take. I feel like it's a question I want us to answer about EBRs. Do you think product roadmaps have a spot in an EBR? Or does it need to be a separate conversation?
It only if it is specifically asked for you to highlight. And then even then, I would find out from the customer, like, what do you want to know about? Because product roadmaps change so frequently. Not often are things always delivered on. And like, it can just be a web, right? So for me, I tend to never have them in my business reviews unless somebody specifically asks for it. And even then, I make them tell me what product or what specific thing are you interested in learning more about? And then that's when I'll try and fill some information in on it.
I totally agree. I also think it just takes us in a weird tangent. It doesn't jive with like this results and impact driven conversation. And I feel like it's more deserving of like a separate 30-minute discussion that's just focused on the roadmap for the people who actually want to hear about the roadmap, not the executive who did not ask for that to be on the agenda.
Yeah, totally. Excellent. Well, CS in a little more than 50 minutes. Hopefully you found the content valuable. We'd love your feedback on how you guys run business reviews. What do you do to prep for them and what your overall thoughts on? I think there's a lot of negativity out in the industry about them, but truthfully, they can be one of those powerful tools for relationship building and value proof. So make sure to do them and let us know if you have any questions. We're always happy to talk with other CSMs and hear what you guys are doing. So thanks for listening and catch you next time.